So, hope everybody's enjoying their Sunday. I haven't posted in a while just because it's been insanely busy, and there's been a lot of economic information that I wanted to talk about, but haven't really had a chance. So, I'm just going to summarize a whole bunch of stuff right now, uh, indicators and reports that have come out the last couple of weeks. And we're going to go ahead and start off with inflation, which did come in stronger in December than it had in prior months. The month-to-month increase in the consumer price index was 0.4%. So overall inflation came out for the year at about 2.9%. And then when we saw, looking at it from the core perspective, which means you take food and energy out, it was only 0.2% for the month of December, but overall year to year is about 3.2%. So we can solidly say that inflation remains at about the 3% level. Fed wants it at 2%. I'm of the opinion that 3% is a more realistic goal going forward. 2% I think is just not realistic, especially if the Fed decides to respond to the pressure that they're now getting from our new president to continue to lower interest rates. They have an opportunity to meet here pretty soon, and more than likely will not lower interest rates, but they're starting to get some pushback from the president on that. Energy really kind of drove inflation last month. It represented 40% of the overall inflationary increase that was seen in the consumer price index. In terms of energy cost overall, they went up about 2.6% in December, with gasoline going up about 4%. And we saw that in gas prices in many parts of the country. Food prices also continue to grow. They were 0.3% month to month, and then were 2.5% year to year. But I would say for a lot of people, they saw their food prices go up more than that. I think that's kind of a muted indicator. And obviously, I always wonder how well CPI does when we're dealing with supply reductions in core food products or other core products, because obviously we're seeing right now significant increases in the price of eggs. And that is, of course, not just something we deal with as shoppers at the grocery store. That's what obviously restaurants and food processors also deal with. That's, of course, due to bird flu that is hitting chicken populations pretty heavily right now. And it is causing a decline in the inventory available in the market. Overall, when you look at inflation in December, because inflation was at 0.4%, wages did not keep up. Wages grew about 0.3%. And as a result, overall earnings in terms of month-to-month earnings growth that actually went down about 0.2%. And the year-to-year increase for 2024 was only about 1%. And that's, of course, real earnings, looking at how your wages are impacted by inflation and saying, how much is your purchasing power going up as an individual, as a household. With respect to employment, obviously December, for whatever reason, looked really good. And I think some of it probably is tied to seasonal work during the holidays. But December saw growth of reports of employment in the household survey, which is where they survey employees. Theoretically, at a seasonal averaging, it should have gone up about 478,000. That's what the Fed reported. Now, this was also after it had gone down by 273,000 in the household report in November. The net increase for the year was about 535,000. The establishment survey, where they actually survey employers, saw an increase of 256,000, and this is the number that is typically associated with how many jobs are actually being created, because it looks at non-farm jobs. And that was in December, about 256,000. For the year 2024, that survey increased by over 2.2 million, 2,232,000. So significant growth of employment overall in 2024. We will see how the revisions that are expected to take effect in March will adjust that number throughout the course of the year. At the same time, for the year 2024, our unemployment grew. The population of unemployment grew by 571,000. And in reality, our workforce participation, labor force participation, still remains relatively weak at 62.5%. You have to remember that before the 2008 recession, our participation was typically in between 66 and 67% of the available population. So our participation remains weak, which means while people are taking jobs, it also means that there's a lot of pressures on the labor market for employees and employers. When we also look at November updates with respect to openings of jobs, total openings actually grew by 159,000 in November. However, for the year, nationally, they're down by 833,000. But hiring activity continues to improve. Last week, there was also some data released with respect to state-by-state job opening data. And I want to talk a little bit about North Carolina, because for the end of the year, North Carolina is only one of 4 states, the other 3 being one of 3 states, the other 2 being California and Texas, that actually saw openings increase in the month of November. We saw openings increase by 53,000 in November, and as of November, we had about 328,000 job openings across the state of North Carolina. However, hires, in terms of hiring, actually decreased by 11,000, which is a little above the pace of last November. There was about 9,000 hires in November of 2023. And we also have to remember there were 27,000 hires in October. So there were two very strong months. So you take October and November together, 38,000 hires across North Carolina. Overall, the adjusted job openings, in terms of on an unadjusted level, and again, adjusted is seasonally adjustments, unadjusted is kind of more the raw data. The unadjusted openings in November increased by 19,000 to just over 300,000. However, hires dropped by 60,000, but at the same time, total separations also dropped by 30,000. And we have to understand that still we have a very plentiful job market for the state of North Carolina, but at the same time, we also know that there's some volatility, especially when you think about the effect of Hurricane Helene and how it affects these numbers, particularly for employers in Western North Carolina. But for the month of November, when we look at overall non-farm employment, it grew by about 15,000 in the month of November adjusted. But then you look at an unadjusted number, which is probably a more realistic number of what actually happened, it grew by 82,000. And this is always fun when you're trying to look at these numbers and you're saying, okay, you've got the seasonal average, which kind of smooths it out and perhaps has a higher potential to be accurate, because both of these reports, whether they're using the unadjusted or adjusted numbers, they are all based on, it's still survey data. So they're using a survey to build a model. So it still remains a challenge. And so, but overall, North Carolina finished out the year strong. That is what's important. When we talk about earnings at a national level, in the fourth quarter, even though what I talked about with respect to wages, we saw that wages are struggling in terms of what's being paid by employers. Overall earnings at the median, year to year, as of the fourth quarter of 24, so really the most recent data available, we saw a year-to-year increase of about 4.1%. So in reality, even though inflation is kicking in, at least based on the average at around 3%, plus or minus maybe a point there or two, the fact is that with wages being at 4%, it does mean that at least in 2024, you will hear a lot of people say that at least wages kept up with inflation. I doubt it really expanded or grew people's purchasing power in a noticeable fashion, but at least for the year 2024, for a lot of people, wages kept up with inflation. I want to finish up talking about home sales and retail sales. We did have strong indicators of growth in existing sales in December. They grew by the pace of growth was increased by 2.2%. This is the third straight month of growth. So the final 3 months of 2024 showed some improvement. However, overall sales and this is influenced by a lot of the challenges and a lot of the lack of sales through most of 2024, paced at just over 4 million units nationwide, which is the lowest pace of volume since 1995. So that, man, it was a very tough year for the real estate industry. It was also a tough year for a lot of families trying to look for homes and trying to afford and buy homes. One of the things that buyers have to look forward to coming up here is that our national housing supply is now back to what was the old standard for a healthy supply of available housing to purchase, which was a 90-day supply. And that needs to be right at about 1 million units that are available. And that's kind of where the supply is now. So we're back to, as a national market, we're back to a healthy supply. Obviously, when we talk about national real estate numbers, there's always the challenge where you realize these are national numbers, but really real estate's all about location. And so just because nationally we may have a 90-day supply does not mean that many markets, especially the markets that are attracting the most residents moving to their area, are in a position to provide that 90-day market, which still creates challenges. And that helps explain why home prices, despite the lack of sales, sale prices went up 6.1% in 2024, and now the average is just over $409,000 per unit. And this is a level of year-to-year appreciation, kind of going back to what we saw in 2022. So we kind of had a little bit of a lull in 23, but still saw some appreciation, and appreciation picked up again in 2024. Starts of new housing, single family housing, kind of pacing right now as of the end of December at about 1 million units per year. Multifamily also picked up some, pacing just under 450,000 units. However, permit activity has kind of lagged, indicating that there's going to be a little bit of a drop possibly in that pace here as we move into the start of 2025. So there is still a challenge in terms of getting housing on the market, getting housing in construction. A lot of that's affected by materials cost, labor cost, and of course, trying to get through regulatory processes. So there are a lot of things that are limiting the growth of housing right now. Finally, with respect to retail sales, December, because again, it's a holiday season, was a good month overall. We saw that retail sales went up 0.4% month to month, and then we also got a revised number for November showing that month to month sales in November increased 0.8%. And of course, what that means overall for 2024 was that retail sales climbed by 3.9%, almost 4%. So that's a good number to have. Again, the challenge with that is that those sales numbers, while that's based on what's happening nationally, do not necessarily reflect retail activity at the local level. And when you're dealing with sales taxes, whether they're based on local sales, local point of sale, or statewide point of sale, or however the point of sale and how the components of and what sales are taxable depending on your state or locality, it may mean different things. So certainly good information overall in terms of economic health for those of us in government that are trying to figure out how to forecast revenues. What's happening in national economic trends may not necessarily align, good or bad, with what's happening in our local area from the revenues that are influenced by these indicators. So still some challenges that we all have to work out as we approach, for many of us, getting ready for a new fiscal year starting in the summer, fiscal year 2026. So I just wanted to bring that all together and hope that I can do some better posting, a better frequency of posting here in the coming week or so. Definitely going to come out with a collection of links on Friday. I may go ahead and have it ready to post Saturday morning, because that'll be February 1st. Promise to do that. But anyway, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.